All right, this is my Module 6 final presentation by me, Morgan Cividanes. And just really quick, the formatting of this presentation is going to be each standard I'm going to read off. And then on the following slide, I'll go over the effects it had on the Annie Dukem case. Okay, so the first document is the standard ISO, just the general requirements and specifically for resource requirements. So for personnel, the laboratory shall document the competence requirements for each function influencing the results of laboratory activities, including requirements for education, qualification, training, technical knowledge, skills, and experience. The laboratory shall ensure that the personnel have the competence to perform laboratory activities for which they are responsible and to evaluate the significance of deviations. So in the Dukem case, a lack of competency allowed Dukem to be able to lie about her master's degree credential. She did not actually have a master's degree in chemistry. This would mean that she did not actually fit the education requirements for the laboratory that she worked at. There was also not sufficient training. When I looked into the case, this was a huge issue that was brought up, that there was no sufficient training for her or other laboratory personnel. And on top of not having a master's degree, you could see how this could be an issue. And without sufficient training, the laboratory could not ensure that Dukem had proper competency. And so the outcome from this was that she lacked competency, she did not fit the education requirements required at her laboratory, and did not have the proper knowledge to fulfill her job duties and responsibilities as a chemist. So continuing on the same documents, but in the process requirements section, we're going to go over the complaints. So the laboratory shall have a documented process to receive, evaluate, and make decisions on complaints. And then we skip a little bit. Whenever possible, the laboratory shall acknowledge receipt of the complaint and provide the complainant with progress reports and the outcome. So the lack of a complaint system here, or an effective complaint system, made it so that several employees within the lab had testified to reporting Dukem on several occasions, and due to various concerns regarding her impossible throughput. So management never looked into the complaints from other personnel. They liked her fast and efficient work because it made money. And so the outcome of this was that management was held responsible. Her fast throughput was due to dry labbing, which means the results were not actually fully tested. And they overall failed to listen to the other personnel that worked directly with her and were able to see her, making these unreal throughput. Okay, continuing with the same document, but in the management review requirements, going over corrective actions. So when a nonconformity occurs, the laboratory shall react to the nonconformity and, as applicable, take action to control it and correct it and address the consequences. So here, corrective action failed. Laboratory management failed to listen to the complaints, as we just went over. If complaints from personnel were addressed properly, corrective action could have been implemented with Dukem. Corrective action is used to mitigate on a smaller scale in most cases. So if corrective action had been taken earlier on, then the lab could have minimized the damage. And speaking of damage, the outcome from this was that 34,000 cases about that were jeopardized. And the laboratory lost the opportunity to stop her nonconformity early on. This was over 9 years worth. Okay, so we're going to switch to the next document, specifically on the laboratory procedures, the AR 3125 and the process requirements. Going over technical records. So if an observation, data, or calculation is rejected, the reason, the identity of the individual or individuals taking the action, and the date shall be recorded in the technical record. So technical record failed here. So Dukem was able to forge other lab personnel's initials on control sheets that record test outcomes. There should be no way that anyone is able to forge initials or signatures in a laboratory. Use of a technical record would remove the possibility for forgery, having some sort of technical record. And when I say this, I mean logging results on a computer versus paper, just having a lot more detail and ability to prevent forgery, just something that would be more, I guess, technical in a sense. So, and the outcome of this was that test outcomes weren't actually verified by the proper lab personnel. Dukem was able to improperly record test outcomes by forging initials of other employees. These personnel were initially investigated intensely to ensure that they were not responsible. So you can see how there could be a lot of confusion with what was Dukin and what wasn't Annie Dukin. Okay, continuing with the same document, still in the process requirements section, but specifically going over ensuring the validity of results. So the performance of personnel shall be monitored. This monitoring shall ensure that all personnel who perform testing or calibration shall successfully complete at least one intra-laboratory comparison, interlaboratory comparison, or proficiency test per calendar year in each discipline on the scope of accreditation in which the individual conducts work. In this case, it was chemistry. In the event that the preceding options are not available or appropriate, observation-based performance monitoring is acceptable. So here validity obviously failed. So intra-laboratory comparison failure. She was intentionally contaminating samples. This made them test positive once they were sent back for a retest. So they would check over her results and they would come back negative and they would send it back to her and be like, hey, can you retest this from her colleagues? And suddenly it's positive because she was contaminating these samples because she was dry labbing. So they weren't initially correct. There's no inter-laboratory comparison, so no record of other labs doing inter-laboratory comparison. Maybe because they weren't accredited, that's probably why other laboratories weren't checking this. Proficiency tests, they were apparently doing them, but they didn't catch any of her discrepancies. So the outcome of this was that she was able to get away with dry labbing. And the lack of accreditation within the lab led to these checks not catching her discrepancies, and management did not further investigate samples that were negative and then suddenly positive. Okay, so the final standard is we're switching to the management system requirements, specifically on internal audits. So internal audit shall provide information on whether the management system conforms to the requirements of this document. Internal audit shall be conducted at least annually as well as prior to the initial accreditation assessment, and internal audit shall include direct observation of the sample of accredited services within each discipline. So here there was obviously a lack of internal auditing or effective internal auditing. So when a lab is accredited, internal audits are required. Internal audits did not follow the strict accreditation guidelines that accredited laboratories have to follow. Even if the lab had a form of internal auditing, major red flags were missed. So in accredited labs, there's quality assurance officers or QA officers, in which this lab did not have that. Chemists would just check each other's work. And so the outcome of this was that management was unable to identify and address Annie Dukin's abnormal work habits. Dukin was able to remove evidence from secure areas without authorization. And ultimately, there was a chain of custody failure, being able to forge people's signatures, which would mean that those people didn't actually, have access to the outcomes, and removing evidence from areas without authorization is clear chain of custody failure. And these are my sources. Thank you for listening.